Emma Thompson had always dreamed of serving her country. Ever since she was a little girl watching soldiers march in parades, she knew that one day she would wear the uniform with pride. At 28, she had made that dream come true. She was one of the most respected sergeants at Riverside Military Base in England, and everyone who knew her could see why Emma was the kind of person who always did the right thing. When other soldiers cut corners, Emma took the time to do things properly. When someone needed help, Emma was always there with a helping hand and a warm smile. Her fellow soldiers looked up to her like a big sister. They came to her with their problems because they knew she would listen and give good advice. Her commanding officers trusted her completely. They gave her the most important tasks because they knew Emma would never let them down. She had been promoted 3 times in 8 years, which was very impressive for someone her age. Emma took pride in doing the right thing, even when nobody was watching. She believed that being a good soldier meant being a good person, both on duty and off duty. The base felt like home to Emma. She knew every building, every path, every corner of Riverside Military Base. She had friends there who were like family. They ate meals together, trained together, and supported each other through good times and bad times. Emma loved the feeling of belonging to something bigger than herself. She loved serving her country and protecting the people she cared about. On a cold Tuesday morning in March, everything changed. The day started like any other day. Emma woke up early, put on her uniform with care, and walked to the mess hall for a breakfast. She chatted with her friends and made plans for the evening. She had no idea that this would be her last normal morning. At the base start at 10 o'clock, Emma received a message that she needed to report to the office of her commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell. This was not unusual. Colonel Mitchell often called soldiers to his office for meetings about assignments or to discuss their work. Emma walked to his office feeling relaxed and confident. She expected another assignment or perhaps praise for her recent work. Just last week, she had completed a difficult training exercise that had impressed everyone. Maybe the colonel wanted to congratulate her or give her a new responsibility. Emma knocked on the door and entered when she heard his voice. Instead of the warm greeting she expected, Emma found official papers waiting for her on the desk. Colonel Mitchell looked uncomfortable and sad. His usual friendly manner was gone, replaced by something that made Emma's stomach feel nervous. "I'm sorry, Emma," Colonel Mitchell said, his voice heavy with sadness. "You're being dismissed from service, effective immediately." Emma's heart stopped. The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt dizzy and confused. This had to be some kind of mistake. She was a good soldier. She had never done anything wrong. She had always followed orders and done her best. "Sir, I don't understand," Emma said, her voice shaking. "What have I done wrong?" "I cannot give you any details," the colonel replied, avoiding her eyes. "Please gather your belongings. Security will escort you off the base." Emma felt like she was living in a nightmare. This could not be happening. She had given 8 years of her life to the military. She had sacrificed personal relationships and opportunities to serve her country. The military was not just a job. It was her identity, her purpose, her home. "But, sir," Emma tried again, "there must be some explanation. I have always served with honor. I have never broken any rules. Please, just tell me what I'm supposed to have done." Colonel Mitchell looked at her with eyes full of pain, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Emma. I truly am, but I cannot discuss this matter further within 2 hours." Emma's 8 years of military service were over. Security officers helped her pack her belongings into boxes, her personal items, her books, her photographs of friends and family. Everything that had made her small room feel like home was quickly packed away. Her friends and fellow soldiers watched in shock as she was led away. They stood in small groups, whispering among themselves and looking confused and upset. Emma could see the questions in their eyes, but the security officers would not let anyone speak to her. Nobody could ask what was happening. Nobody could say goodbye. The woman who had given everything to her country was leaving in shame and silence. Emma walked past the people who had been her family for 8 years, unable to explain what was happening because she did not understand it herself. As the base gates closed behind her, Emma felt her world crumble. The place that had been her home for so long was now forbidden to her. The career she had worked so hard to build was over. The respect she had earned was gone. She sat in the back of the car that was taking her away from everything she loved, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She had no idea why this was happening. She had no idea that this terrible day was actually the beginning of something much bigger than she could see. Imagine. Emma returned to her small hometown of Millfield with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. The train journey from the military base had felt like the longest trip of her life. As she watched the familiar countryside roll past the window, she could hardly believe that just yesterday she had been Sergeant Emma Thompson. Now she was just Emma, a woman with no job, no home, and no idea what to do next. Millfield was a quiet town where everyone knew everyone else. Emma had grown up here, but she had been away for so long that it felt strange and unfamiliar. The streets looked smaller than she remembered. The shops seemed older and more tired. Even her childhood home, where her elderly parents still lived, felt like a place from someone else's life. Her parents were kind and loving, but they were also confused and worried. They had been so proud of their daughter's military career. They had bragged to their neighbors about Sergeant Emma Thompson, who served her country with honor. Now, they did not know what to tell people when they asked why Emma had come home so suddenly. The military had been her life, her family, her purpose. For ages, she had woken up every morning knowing exactly who she was and what she was supposed to do. She had been part of something important and meaningful. Now she felt lost and alone, like a ship without a compass drifting in an endless ocean. Her savings ran out quickly. Military pay was not high, and Emma had always been careful with money. But she had not been prepared for unemployment. Within a few weeks, she realized that she needed to find work immediately. The problem was that Millfield was a small town with limited opportunities, especially for someone whose only real work experience was in the military. She took a job at Betty's Diner, the only restaurant in town that was hiring. Betty was a kind woman in her 60s who had run the diner for 30 years. She offered Emma work as a waitress, serving tea and sandwiches to local customers. The pay was low, but it was honest work, and Emma was grateful to have anything. The work was harder than Emma had expected, not because it was physically difficult, but because it was such a change from her old life. It was hard to go from being a respected sergeant who made important decisions to asking, "Would you like milk with that?" Every day felt like a reminder of how far she had fallen. The customers were mostly local people who had known Emma when she was growing up. Some of them were kind and tried to make conversation, but Emma could see the questions in their eyes. They wondered why she was working in a diner instead of serving in the military. They wondered what had happened to the girl who had left town with such big dreams. The worst part was the loneliness. Emma had lived on base for so long that she had forgotten how to be a civilian. Military life was structured and social. There were always people round, always something to do, always a sense of community and belonging. Now she spent her days serving customers who were polite but distant, and her evenings alone in her small flat above the bakery lot at night. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she had done wrong. She went over every decision she had made, every conversation she had had, every report she had written. She searched her memory for any mistake that could have led to her dismissal. But she could not find anything. People in town whispered about her. In a small place like Millfield, gossip travelled fast. Some said she must have done something terrible to be kicked out of the army. Others felt sorry for her but didn't know what to say. The whispers followed her wherever she went, to the grocery store, to the post office, even to church on Sundays. Emma stopped going to the local pub where she used to meet old school friends when she came home on leave. The conversations felt awkward and forced. Her old friends had normal jobs and normal problems. They talked about mortgages and marriages and children. Emma had nothing to contribute to these conversations. Her life had been so different, and now it felt like it had all been for nothing. She stopped answering her phone when old military friends tried to call. She was too ashamed to talk to them. What could she say? That she had been dismissed and she did not even know why. That she was now working in a diner in a small town. That her 8 years of service had ended in disgrace and confusion. Weeks turned into months. Emma's confidence disappeared like water soaking into dry ground. She began to believe that maybe she really had done something wrong. Maybe she wasn't the good person she thought she was. Maybe her 8 years of service meant nothing. Maybe she deserved what had happened to her. She started to doubt everything about herself. Had she been a good soldier? Or had she just been fooling herself? Had her fellow soldiers really respected her? Or had they been laughing at her behind her back? Had she made some terrible mistake that she was too stupid or too proud to see? But Emma didn't know that far away, important people were working day and night to clear her name. She didn't know that her dismissal was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something extraordinary. While Emma struggled in Millfield, serving tea and sandwiches at Betty's diner, Colonel Mitchell was fighting his own battle hundreds of miles away every morning when he woke up. The first thing he thought about was Emma Thompson every night. When he went to bed, he wondered if he had made the right choice. He had made the hardest decision of his military career when he dismissed Emma, and it broke his heart every day. The colonel was a good man who had served his country for 25 years. He had seen many difficult situations, but nothing had prepared him for what he had to do to Emma. He knew that she was innocent. He knew that she was one of the finest soldiers he had ever commanded, but he also knew things that Emma did not know, things that had forced him to make an impossible choice. The truth was that Emma had accidentally discovered something terrible. 3 months before her dismissal, she had been doing routine work in the supply office. Emma was always thorough and careful with paperwork, which was one of the reasons her officers trusted her with important tasks while checking supply records for the monthly report. She had noticed something that did not make sense. The records showed that expensive equipment was being ordered and delivered to the base, but the same equipment was not showing up in the inventory lists. At first, Emma thought it might be a simple mistake in the paperwork. She double-checked the numbers and looked through old files to make sure she was reading everything correctly. But the more she looked, the more worried she became. Equipment meant for soldiers was disappearing from the records: protective gear, communication devices, medical supplies, all sorts of things that soldiers needed to stay safe and do their jobs properly. Some of the missing equipment was being replaced with cheaper, lower-quality alternatives. Emma had found evidence that someone was stealing from the military. The expensive, high-quality equipment that was supposed to protect soldiers was being sold to make money for whoever was behind the theft. In its place, cheap and sometimes faulty gear was being given to the soldiers who trusted their lives to it. This was not just theft. It was something that could get soldiers killed. If a soldier's protective gear failed because it was cheap and poorly made, that soldier could die. If communication equipment did not work properly during a mission, entire units could be put in danger. Emma realized that lives were at risk because of this corruption. Emma had reported what she found. Just as she was supposed to, she took her evidence to her immediate supervisor, who passed it up the chain of command. Emma felt proud that she had discovered the problem and could help stop it. She thought she would be praised for her careful work and attention to detail. But the corruption went very high up in the military chain. Some very powerful people were involved in the theft. People with high ranks and important positions. These corrupt officers had been stealing from the military for years, making large amounts of money while putting soldiers' lives at risk. When they learned that Emma had found evidence against them, they were furious and frightened. They knew that if the truth came out, they would lose their careers, their reputations, and their freedom. They would face prison time for their crimes. So they used their power and influence to demand Emma's immediate dismissal. They told Colonel Mitchell that Emma was a troublemaker who could not be trusted. They said she was spreading false accusations against good officers. They threatened to destroy his career if he did not get rid of her immediately. They gave him a choice: dismiss Emma quietly, or face serious consequences for himself and his family. Colonel Mitchell knew Emma was innocent. He had worked with her for 3 years and knew her character. He knew she was honest, dedicated, and trustworthy. He also knew that the evidence she had found was real and important. But he also knew that if she stayed on the base, she might be in danger from the corrupt officers who wanted to silence her. So he made a terrible choice to protect Emma and to protect the investigation that was quietly beginning. He had to let her go without explanation. He could not tell her why she was being dismissed because that would put her in even greater danger. The corrupt officers were watching to make sure she was removed and silenced. For months after Emma's dismissal, military investigators worked in secret. They used Emma's evidence as the starting point for a much larger investigation. Special agents from military intelligence began looking into the corruption network, trying to identify all the people involved and gather proof of their crimes. It was dangerous work. The corrupt officers were powerful and ruthless. They had already destroyed Emma's career to protect themselves, and they would not hesitate to hurt anyone else who threatened them. The investigators had to be very careful not to let the guilty people know they were being watched. Emma's name was cleared in the secret files, but she couldn't be told yet. The investigation was still ongoing, and her safety depended on the corrupt officers believing that she had been successfully silenced. Colonel Mitchell watched from afar as the woman who had served with honor struggled to rebuild her life in Millfield. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, every day. He wanted to call her and tell her the truth. Every day. He wanted to explain that she had done nothing wrong, that she was actually a hero who had helped expose terrible crimes, but he could not risk her safety or the success of the investigation. 1 year after Emma's dismissal, the investigation finally reached its end. It had been a long and difficult process, but the military investigators had done their job well. They had gathered evidence, followed leads, and built a strong case against the corrupt officers who had been stealing from the military for years. On a cold morning in February, the arrests began. In a coordinated operation across multiple military bases throughout England, corrupt officers were taken into custody. Some were arrested at their homes while they were having breakfast with their families. Others were arrested at their offices while they were pretending to do their normal duties. A few tried to run when they realized what was happening, but they were quickly caught. The operation was swift and thorough. Military police and investigators had planned every detail carefully. They knew they would only get one chance to arrest all the corrupt officers before they could warn each other or destroy evidence. Within 6 hours, 15 high-ranking officers were in custody, facing charges of theft, fraud, and endangering the lives of soldiers. The stolen equipment was recovered from warehouses and private storage facilities, boxes and boxes of expensive military gear that should have been protecting soldiers were found hidden away, waiting to be sold for a profit. The investigators also found bank accounts full of money that had been made from selling equipment that belonged to the military. The case was closed, and the results were impressive. The investigators had uncovered a theft ring that had stolen millions of pounds worth of equipment over 5 years. More importantly, they had stopped a practice that was putting soldiers' lives at risk every day: the cheap, faulty equipment that had been given to soldiers in place of the stolen gear would no longer threaten their safety. Emma's evidence had been the key to everything. The supply records she had discovered and reported had provided the first clues that led to the entire investigation. Her integrity and attention to detail had helped save lives and protect millions of pounds of taxpayer money. The investigators wrote in their final report that without Emma Thompson's careful work and honest reporting, the corruption might have continued for many more years. She was not only innocent, she was a hero. But Emma had no idea about any of this. She was still working at Betty's diner in Millfield, still believing that she had somehow failed as a soldier, still wondering what she had done wrong to deserve dismissal from the military she had loved so much. Colonel Mitchell finally received permission to tell Emma the truth. For a full year, he had carried the burden of knowing that an innocent woman was suffering while he could not tell her why. For a full year, he had watched from a distance as Emma's life fell apart, knowing that she was actually a hero who deserved praise, not punishment. The phone call from his superior officers brought tears to his eyes. Not only could he finally explain to Emma what had really happened, but he had also received permission to do something very special for the sergeant who had suffered so much for doing the right thing. In London, military officials prepared for an unprecedented event. High-ranking officers from the Ministry of Defence met with members of Parliament and even representatives from the royal family. Emma Thompson was about to receive one of the highest honours her country could give, the Military Cross, normally reserved for acts of exceptional bravery in combat, would be awarded to her for her courage in exposing corruption that threatened the lives of her fellow soldiers. But first, she needed to know the truth about why she had been dismissed. The officials decided that Colonel Mitchell should personally travel to Millfield to tell Emma what had happened and to bring her back to London for the ceremony. It was the least they could do for someone who had sacrificed so much for doing what was right. The plan was set carefully. Military transport would take Colonel Mitchell to Millfield. He would find Emma and explain everything to her. Then, if she agreed, she would be brought back to London for a ceremony that would restore her honour and give her the recognition she deserved. The military owed her a debt that could never be fully repaid, but they would start by giving her back her honour and her place among the finest soldiers in the British Army. Preparations began immediately. A helicopter was prepared for the journey to Millfield. Official documents were prepared to reinstate Emma with full honours and a promotion. The Military Cross was polished and placed in its presentation box. Everything was ready to write a terrible wrong and give Emma Thompson the recognition she had earned through her integrity and sacrifice. Emma had no idea that her life was about to change again. She went to work at Betty's diner that Tuesday morning. Just like any other day, she put on her simple uniform of black trousers and white shirt, tied her hair back, and walked downstairs to begin another day of serving tea and sandwiches to the people of Millfield. She had no idea that hundreds of miles away, important people were preparing to honor her as a hero. She had no idea that before the day was over, she would understand that sometimes the greatest tests of our character happen when we stand alone, holding onto what's right even when the whole world seems against us. It was a quiet Tuesday morning at Betty's diner in the small town of Millfield. The morning rush was over, and only a few regular customers remained, drinking their tea and reading newspapers. Emma was moving between the tables, refilling cups and clearing away empty plates. She had been working at the diner for over a year now, and the routine had become as familiar to her as breathing. Old Mr. Jenkins was sitting in his usual corner booth, working on the crossword puzzle. Mrs. Patterson was at the counter, chatting with Betty about her grandchildren who lived in London. Two farmers from outside town were discussing the weather and their crops over bacon and eggs. It was the kind of peaceful morning that happened every day in Millfield, where nothing exciting ever seemed to occur. Emma was serving breakfast to the regular customers when she heard a sound that made her heart race. At first, it was just a distant rumble, like thunder on a clear day, but as it grew louder, she recognized what it was. The deep, powerful thrum of helicopter blades filled the air above Millfield. Everyone in the diner stopped what they were doing. Mr. Jenkins looked up from his crossword puzzle. Mrs. Patterson stopped talking mid-sentence. The farmers put down their forks and listened. Military helicopters did not fly over Millfield on ordinary Tuesday mornings. The sound grew louder and closer until it seemed to be directly overhead. The windows of the diner vibrated with the noise, and the dishes on the tables rattled slightly. Emma felt her hands begin to shake. She had not heard that sound for over a year, not since her last day at the military base. The customers rushed outside to see what was happening. Emma followed slowly, wiping her hands on her apron with nervous movements. Her heart was beating so fast that she could hear it in her ears. She stepped out of the diner and looked up at the sky. Shielding her eyes from the bright morning sun, a large military helicopter was circling above the town, looking for a place to land. Emma could see the military markings on its side, and she felt a mixture of fear and longing that she had not experienced for months. The helicopter found a suitable spot in the field next to the diner and began to descend. The whole town gathered to watch. People came out of shops and houses, drawn by the unusual sight. Children pointed excitedly at the helicopter while their parents watched with curious expressions. Nothing like this had ever happened in Millfield before. The helicopter touched down gently in the field, its blades still turning but slowing down. The grass flattened under the powerful wind from the rotors, and dust swirled through the air. Emma stood with the crowd of townspeople, but she felt separate from them, as if she were watching everything happen from a great distance. The helicopter door opened, and Colonel Mitchell stepped out in full dress uniform. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had not seen him since that terrible day when he had dismissed her from service. He looked older than she remembered, and there were new lines round his eyes, but his bearing was still proud and military. He walked straight toward Emma, who stood frozen in disbelief. Behind him came other high-ranking officers she didn't recognize, all wearing their finest uniforms with ribbons and medals gleaming in the sunlight. The crowd of townspeople moved aside to let them pass, sensing that something important was happening. Emma could not move or speak. She felt like she was in a dream, watching someone else's life unfold. Colonel Mitchell stopped directly in front of her, and she could see tears in his eyes. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before: regret, sadness, and deep respect. "Sergeant Emma Thompson," Colonel Mitchell said in a voice loud enough for the whole town to hear, "I have come to apologize on behalf of Her Majesty's Armed Forces. You were dismissed not because you did anything wrong, but because you did everything right." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She felt her knees go weak, and for a moment she thought she might fall down. The people of Millfield were completely silent, listening to every word with tears in his eyes. Colonel Mitchell explained everything. Emma's evidence had brought down a corruption ring that had put soldiers' lives at risk. Her dismissal had been necessary to protect both her and the investigation. She had been a hero all along, but they had not been able to tell her until now. As he spoke, Emma felt a year of pain and confusion begin to lift from her shoulders. All the sleepless nights wondering what she had done wrong, all the shame and self-doubt, all the loneliness and despair. It had all been for nothing. She had been right all along. She had done her duty, and she had done it well. In front of her entire hometown. Emma was offered her rank back with a promotion to staff sergeant. She was awarded the Military Cross for exceptional service. Most importantly, she was welcomed back into the military family that had never stopped believing in her. As Emma climbed aboard the helicopter that would take her back to her true home, she realized something important. Honor isn't about being recognized or praised. True honor comes from doing what's right, even when it costs us everything, even when we stand alone. The end.